Satnam Sri Vaheguru Sahib Ji. Dandavat Vandan Anakabar Sarvakala Samrate Dolanate Rakho Prabhu Nanak De Karat Firta Prabhaya Parya To Sarnaye Nanak Ki Prabhi Apani Bhagati Rai Nanak Ki Prabhi Apani Bhagati Rai. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So Sad Sangat Ji, with the Kirpa of the Sangat and Guru Sahib's Kirpa, today we'll be looking at the second part of this series in remembering June 1984 and the events that occurred at Sri Harimandar Sahib in that week. So just a quick roundup as to what was discussed yesterday. We looked at how Sikhs have been fighting for their rights and the rights of Punjabis ever since the partition or the creation of India in 1947. We had things in 1966 such as the Punjabi Subha movement, fighting for our own language, and then our cries not being heard, our demands not being met, which culminated into the resolution, which was known as the Anandpur Sahib Resolution in 1978. After peaceful protests and nothing coming out from the government in terms of an effective response, the Sikhs then stepped it up a notch, led by Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, the then leader of Damdami Taksal, and starting the Dharam Yudh Morcha in 1982. And we looked at how Sikhs from the time of 1981 to 1984 had been labelled as terrorists, as separatists, and as disloyal to the India. And this propaganda machine was led by Indira Gandhi, the current Prime Minister at the time. Another important date that a lot of this week fixates around is the 3rd of June, in which, as part of the Dharam Yudh Morcha, Punjabis had decided to stop the outflow of grain. And at that point, 60% of grain for India came from Punjab, along with restricting access to water and electricity from Punjab. We looked at yesterday how preparations were being made from up to 2 years before the attack, with replicas of Sri Harimandar Sahib made in the Doon Valley in the Chakrata Hills in Uttarakhand, and with the help from commandos from the SAS in the UK. So today we're going to focus on the 1st and 2nd of June, the events that took place, and also in particular look at two personalities that stick out when reading about this class, and also try to address some common misconceptions, as I'll try to do every day. So on June the 1st, thousands of Sangat flood into Sri Harimandar Sahib, and they start their preparations for the celebration of the martyrdom, the Shaheed Purb of Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, which is also meant to take place on the 3rd of June. So many things revolving around the 3rd of June. And the Indian establishment, the Punjab police and the army are well aware of all these Sikhs, all this Sangat that are flooding into Sri Harimandar Sahib. Now at this point, the Singhs are aware that everything is about to go down and the attack is imminent on Sri Harimandar Sahib. So the Singhs do not stand there idle. They set up defences led by Sant Jarnail Singh, and in particular General Subeg Singh, who will go on to look into a little more detail towards the end of the talk. Now, one of the leaders in terms of the Indian army was General Bra, in addition to General Sundarji. And yesterday we mentioned General Sinha, who actually rejected the invitation to attack Harimandar Sahib due to the respect he had for the religious freedoms of the Sikhs. And on the 1st, between the 1st and 2nd of June, we find that General Bra, along with a few men, disguise themselves and go around the complex of Sri Harimandar Sahib in order to assess the kind of defenses and the ammunition and the potential retaliation that the Sikhs can put up with. And in his report, he states that it will take us no longer than 6 hours to take over this complex, something that he seriously underestimated, and also something we can take from in terms of inspiration as for how long the Singhs and the Singhani actually held back the might of the Indian army. So at 12:40, just in the beginning of the afternoon, the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force of Punjab, opens fire on Sri Harimandar Sahib, and this lasts for 8 hours. And this Sangaji marks the start of the Battle of Sri Amritsar Sahib. And in this battle, initially, we see attacks on Sri Harimandar Sahib itself, which had over 100 bullet holes after the first day. The whole complex of the Darbar Sahib, and in particular Darshan Duri, which is the entrance to Sri Harmandir Sahib, the Langar Hall, and Akal Takht Sahib, along with accompanying buildings around the complex. And one name that stands out whenever hearing this itihas is the name of Shaheed Bhai Mandeep Singh Babbar, also known as Kulwant Singh. And he was one of 11 Sikhs that were Shaheed on the 1st of June. And we'll go into a little bit more into his personality in a few minutes. But just to outline what happened on the 1st of June, Bhai Sahib, along with a few other Gursikhs, had taken post at Baba Atalrai Gurdwara, which is a short walk away from Sri Harmandir Sahib. And it's also known for being a very tall building. It has 9 stories. And Bhai Sahib, at the top of that 9th story, was looking out for any troops that had made their way in or were laying fire to the complex of Sri Harimandar Sahib. And our history writes that he shot 3 officers shooting towards them before he was shot by a sniper in his matha, in his forehead. And he was known as the first Shaheed of Sri Harimandar Sahib of the attack in 1984. And the amazing, inspiring story of Bhai Sahib, by Menga Singh Ji, was that when he was shot in his forehead, he fell to the floor, and the Singhs local to him asked Bhai Sahib, "How are you? Are you okay? Do you feel any pain?" And Bhai Sahib returns, gives them a reply by smiling and saying, "I'm in Jardi Kala. I'm in forever rising spirits." Such is the state of those Gursikhs that were battling in this fight. And they weren't just any armed bande, these average people. These people had serious amounts of seva and bhakti behind them, which allowed them to come out with the feats that they accomplished. And it's also said in our history that Bhai Menga Singh Ji did not become Shaheed straight away. After he was shot in the forehead, he was taken to Guru Nanak Dev Ji Niwas, and there a Sukhmani Sahib was recited. And after hearing that whole Sukhmani Sahib, Bhai Menga Singh Ji breathed his last breaths. And his sanskar was done the next day on the 2nd of June, which we'll talk about in a second. So attacks are coming from the outside of Sri Harmandir Sahib by the Indian Army, and the Singhs and the Singhaniya in Sri Harmandir Sahib complex are on strict orders not to retaliate from Sant Jarnail Singh Ji until the Indian Army enters Sri Harmandir Sahib. At 9 p.m., just after the firing had finished for the first day, at 9 p.m., the Indian government announced a curfew, a Punjab-wide ban on anyone leaving or entering or moving homes or entering the streets. And that lasts for 36 hours. So just in summary, on the 1st of June, the firing starts at midday. Thousands of Sangat have come for preparations for the celebration of Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shahidi. There are restrictions on people leaving Amritsar, but not any people entering. And the Singhs set up defenses, and the first Shaheed, the first out of those 11 Shaheeds, was Bhai Menga Singh Ji, who after being shot in the head, announced that he is still in Jardi Kala and he is still in forever high spirits. So now we go on to the 2nd of June, and at 12 o'clock, the firing starts again in the morning, and at 12 o'clock midday, the government declares Punjab a restricted area, which means that no movement is allowed in the state of Punjab. And this includes public transport, so trains, buses, all those kind of things are brought to a standstill. But at the same time, what's important to recognize and pay attention to is that Sangat are still allowed in Sri Harmandir Sahib despite the curfew. So although practically the rest of Punjab has come to a standstill, they are still allowing Sangat into Sri Harmandir Sahib, even though the past day there were shots fired and a potential threat to the average person. At the same time, on the 2nd of June, Indira Gandhi makes a public announcement nationwide on Doordarshan TV, and she appeals that I appeal, don't shed blood, shed hatred. Now, this statement itself is contradictory, because by shedding hatred, the result of that will be blood at one point. And this is also contrary to her orders that have come from the Delhi government to the Indian army that are about to take over to kill as many Sikhs as possible. At the same time, we have Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and the warriors of the Khalsa Panth in Sri Harimandar Sahib preparing for the attack that is being prepared. And on the 2nd of June, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji records their last known speech in which they talk about the atrocities that the Indian government have started and also plead the Sad Sangat, the Sikhs of Punjab and the diaspora, to not let this go very lightly and to retaliate with all the force that we possibly have. At the same time, Gyani Gurpal Singh, who was the acting Jathedar of Akal Takht at that time, and also Bhai Sahib Singh, who was the head Granthi of Sri Harimandar Sahib, also issue an edict, a statement, a hukamnama, calling all Sangat, calling all Sikhs to come and defend Sri Harimandar Sahib. So officially, the battle has started, if you like. And on the night of the 2nd of June, the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force, are replaced with the army. And we find from reports that up to 70 to 100,000 armed officers are in Punjab at this point. On the 2nd of June, the sanskar by Menga Singh Ji is done by Manji Sahib Diwan Hall, from which Gatha happens even till today, every day from Sri Harimandar Sahib. And this was quite an important, a vital point in this whole timeline, because at this point, not only were the Singhs and Singhniya, not only was the Khalsa paying their respects to the first Shaheed, but it was also a chance for everyone to come together for the slightest of moments. And eyewitnesses say that people from all different Jathebandis, from different groups that were involved protecting Harimandar Sahib came, and it also hurt the sentiments very deeply, but at the same time gave them and drove them to lay down their lives if need be, in the same spirit, in the same sense of Chardigla that Bhai Menga Singh Ji did. So those are the first 2 days. The firing has started. Singhs and Singhniya people in the Harimandar Sahib have started becoming Shaheed, and calls from the Sikhs have been sent out to come and fortify and protect Harimandar Sahib. And on the 3rd of June, we see the Indian army enter Sri Harimandar Sahib, but we'll go into that a little bit tomorrow. So at this point, I just wanted to address 2 misconceptions, as I'll try to do in each of the videos daily. The first one that often arises is that why did Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and also the other Singhs at the time have weapons in Akal Takht Sahib? Now, this is a really important question, and for those of us that aren't well versed in Sikh history, it can be quite alarming. Why on earth would people take weapons into a place of worship? To understand this problem and the problem with the question, we have to go back to our itihas, and in particular, the itihas of Sri Akal Takht Sahib. So just to understand what Akal Takht is, for those of us that have been to Harimandar Sahib, we have Harimandar Sahib in the middle in the Sarovar, and just outside of it, by the entrance, we have Sri Akal Takht Sahib that is facing towards a slight slant, towards the direction of Delhi. Now that building was made as our governance, of our central point of contact for any decisions that are made by Sri Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, the Sikh Guru. And it was made as a statement and as per the hukam, as per the commands of the 5th Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, who after being made, gave orders to their son, Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, to now give Sikhs a political platform so which we can be sovereign, from which we can govern ourselves, and also start to arm the Sikh people at the time, from which Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj themselves now sent out orders to not bring food or anything else in terms of donations. Bring me kore, bring me shastar, bring me weapons. And at that time, Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj created what's known as the first Sikh army, the first army of the Khalsa, the Akal Sena, in which 2,200 horsemen were forever ready if the calling came. Now, in all of the takhts, in the Panch Takht in India, one consistency throughout is that we have shastar, we have weapons, whether they're banduks, whether they're all guns, whether they're bows and arrows, whether they're talwara, whatever type of shastar they may be, they are all placed in a high point, a respectable point in each of the main takhts, in each of the main gurdwara. And also when we matha take at any gurdwara across the world, you will always see shastar in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. And then within the Bani of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, Guru Sahib describes many of their favorite weapons and then says, Yeh hamare peer, that these are like my gurus, these are the things I worship. because in times of battle and times of need, these are my saviors. So right from the offset, from Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, there's been this very important emphasis on the importance of carrying weapons and being ready in terms of military warfare should the call arise, as it has many times in our history, and as it did for the Singhs led by Sant Jarnail Singh Ji in 1984. So the fact that there are weapons rightly so kept in Akal Takht Sahib outrules the question of why the Singhs were keeping weapons at that point. Just to take this a little bit further, we have one of the main reasons in 1699 when Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj themselves blessed us with a Panj Kakar, one of which was the Karpan. Now the Karpan is not just a ceremonial dagger as it gets listed around in today's world. It is a weapon, whether we want to deny it or not, but it's not a weapon that should be used whenever we feel like it. There are specific rules and specific conducts. And one of these, as mentioned yesterday, is that when all means fails, only then is it righteous to pick up the sword. And in this case, for more than 40 years of diplomacy falling on deaf ears, all the means had failed, and the fight had been brought to the doorstep of Sri Harimandar Sahib, and it was now up to those Singhs and Singhniya to defend it with all their might. And that meant including weapons. And another point on weapons is something important to remember. Later on in the second wave of genocide in 1984 in November, one of the tactics of the Delhi police was to disarm all the Sikhs that had registered weapons in their houses. And the play they said was that if you keep weapons at home, we won't be able to protect you. But what they were actually doing was disarming them so that mobs that were protected by the police could go in and attack, rape, and loot Sikh homes freely. But what we realized from that time is that those Sikhs that kept their Shastar, those are the houses that remained untouched. So these are the buttons of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj that the Singhs and Singhniya at the time were keeping and upholding. Now, just to finish this point off, let's take the sphere of religion away from everything. Let's forget 1984 and let's just think about our personal lives. Now, imagine you know that there is a mob coming to your house and they're coming for your women, they're coming for your history, they're coming for your life's possessions, they're coming to kill. Now, if the people you entrust and put your faith in to uphold the law are the ones perpetrating this act, i.e. the police are the ones that are helping instigate this, then that option of asking for help from the police is out of the window. And you have no other means to defend yourself with whatever you can and whatever is necessary. So it makes no sense to sit there eating samosa and waiting for a miracle to happen, because there's a threat that's imminent to your house. And in the same way, the house of every Sikh is Sri Harimandar Sahib. So the Singhs and the Singhniya at that time took it personally and did everything they could, which meant employing weapons and using them to the best of their abilities. So just a second misconception that I'd like to address in this talk is that the army went in to capture militants. As mentioned earlier, from 1981 to 1984, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was labelled as this extremist right-wing militant who was trying to create his own country and disband Punjab from India. Now, we mentioned yesterday, and I provided sources for how that's not the case, and it couldn't be further from the truth. But one of the interesting points in 1982 is that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was actually arrested on false allegations and freed soon after because there was no evidence that linked him to the claim. And one quote that I'd like to mention, I could have mentioned many, but due to time, I'll just focus on this one, is from Joyce Pettigrew, who I mentioned yesterday, and her book I mentioned yesterday, Sikhs of the Punjab. And she talks about this attack in its true context. And she says that the army went into Darbar Sahib not to eliminate a political figure, as they'd made it out to be, or a political movement, as they'd also made it out to be. Rather, to suppress the culture of a people, to attack their heart, to strike a blow at their spirit and self-confidence. That quote, Sat Sangat, can be found on page 8 of Joyce Pettigrew's book. So it's clear that this whole facade of we're going after these handful of militant Sikhs led by this militant leader was absolute nonsense and gave them a very bad excuse to attack and to inflict as much pain as possible in one of the busiest times in the Sikh calendar at Sri Harimandar Sahib. So now just two personalities I'd like to talk about in a bit more detail before we wrap up. And the first one I mentioned was General Shaheed Singh, who was one of the most decorated generals and still is one of the most decorated generals in the history of the Indian Army. And if you remember, I mentioned a few minutes ago, he was the main organizer of the defense at Sri Harimandar Sahib that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji had specifically asked for his assistance. Now, if we look at General Subhaig Singh, there are a lot of things from his life we can take inspiration from. So he was one of the most decorated army generals of the Indian Army. And when he was 18 years old, he equaled the 100-meter sprint record in India. From a very young age, he was a very strong and very forward-thinking youth. He was also the district-based jump champion of Punjab. He was famous for his hand and his tactics in the war against the Japanese in Burma for the Indian Army. And he also became then, following that, a paratrooper, which is by no means any easy thing. He was famous in the Bangladesh War for the training of the Mukti Bahani, who are a youth rebellious group who General Subhaig Singh trained in order to protect their motherland. After that, he became the general for the army, covering states such as Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Orissa. So very, very big accolades, very, very big titles, and rightly so, because he was an amazing man, an amazing general with great vision. But the downfall of this story and the sad part and the discrimination that occurred to General Subhaig Singh came on the 30th of April in 1976, which was a day before his retirement from the Indian Army. And a day before his retirement, he was dismissed from his service, which was obviously a blow. After all those years, practically his life was given to the Indian Army. He was then stripped of his titles and dismissed from the only thing that he knew at the time. And the reason, the bogus claim for why he was dismissed was because he accepted a plaque which was worth 2,500 rupees whilst on post in Jabalpur. But the worrying thing is that the seniors of him, his seniors did the exact same at the time. And it was also customary for Indian senior officers to accept such awards. So this bogus claim, for whatever reason, this discriminative reason, was one thing that very much shook General Subhaig Singh and left him disappointed and outraged at the Indian Army and the Indian establishment. After realizing and seeing the events culminate from 1978 up until 1984, in March 1984, he joined Sant Jarnail Singh Ji in the Sri Harimandar Sahib complex and planned the defenses. And as I mentioned earlier, his defenses were so amazing that General Bra, who led the attack, claimed that it would take 6 hours from the 1st of June to enter Sri Harimandar Sahib. But due to the strategic planning of General Subhaig Singh and the Singhs at the time, it took them more than 6 days, the might of the Indian Army, to try and get past 250 Singhs and Singhania. Now, the last person I want to talk about is a very famous personality and someone that is very personal to many people, myself included, which is Bhai Mandeep Singh Babbar, also known as Kulwant Singh. And as I mentioned earlier, he was shot on June the 1st. He was the first Shaheed, and even the Sakhi of his Shaheed was amazing. After being shot in the forehead, he told the Singhs that I'm still in Jadikala, I'm still in high spirits, this will not get me down. And then only after listening to a Sri Sukhmani Sahib part, he gave his last breaths. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight to the kind of personality Bhai Mandeep Singh Babbar was. And similarly, many of the Singhs and Singhania were at that time, just so you get a bit more of a personal experience with this week of June 1984. And at this point, I'd like to thank the Instagram page Bantik Media for putting up an interview about Bhai Mandeep Singh Babbar, and we'll put a link to that at the end from which this information was taken. So Bibi Amarjit Kaur describes Bhai Mandeep Singh as being an amazing Gursikh, a very loving husband, and a husband that did so much seva of her, so much that they never called Bhai Sahib Mandeep Singh or Kulwant Singh. And the household name for Bhai Mandeep Singh was Jatayu. Now, Jatayu has connotations from the story of the Ramayana, in which it was a bird-like creature that did amazing seva for Sita and Ram at the time. Sita, who was captured and went against to fight in defense of Sita, and metaphorically representing the seva that Jatayu did for Sita and Raman at the time. And because of that seva that Jatayu did for Sita, the name of Jatayu was given to Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji, and the household name for Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji was Jatayu. And there was a Sakhi, there was a point where you could say his Shahidi began. And Bibi Amarjit Kaur relays a story where they go to Anandapur Sahib one day, and at Kirapur Sahib, which is where many Gursikhs give their ashes now, so a very important place in terms of the death or the passing away of a Gursikh, Bhai Manga Singh Ji Babbar does an ardas, and after coming back from the ardas, his wife Bibi Amarjit Kaur says, "Did you do the ardas for me as well? I hope you did. I hope you did my ardas as well." And Bhai Sahib replies by, "No, I didn't." And she says, "Why not? Why didn't you do your ardas for me?" And he replies by saying, "Because my ardas to Guru Sahib was that I attain Shahidi in this life, is that I give my life, my last breath for the Pant." And in her closing statement, she says that we are grateful for his Shahidi. So such are the great Gursikhs, such as Bhai Manga Singh Ji, that gave their life and gave their last breaths as well in Seva of the Pant. Now, for the last 2 or 3 minutes, I just want to talk about a concept that may be alien to many of us, and a concept that really inspired me and gave me quite a lot of haunsla when coming into Sikhi. And that is this essence of Shahidi. Now, there's a saying that Khalsa di donne pasu fateh hundi hai, that from both sides in a battle, the Khalsa is always victorious. Now, what that means is whether a Khalsa wins physically in the battlefield or is made Shaheed, either is a victory. And that is the psyche of a Sikh. And the stories I'm about to tell you will also add to that narrative as well. So I just want to talk about the power of these Shaheed Singhs and the power of giving Shahidi and how blessed someone has to be as those Shaheed Singh and Singhia in 1984. And I'm going to take you back a few years, 30, 40 years prior to 1984, when Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji Khalsa Pind Ramwale was the leader of Dami Taksal at the time. And this Sakhi is referenced from their autobiography, which is written by Gyani Pritam Singh Ji in Gyan Kirana, which Bhai Jeevat Singh Ji has done the translation for, which is readily available, and I'll show you the book at the end. Now, in this autobiography, Gyani Pritam Singh describes one of the Sakhis, one of the times that Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji was talking to the Singhs about experience. And they were in a time after doing Simran for 40 days at Sri Chamkaur Sahib, when they were overfilled with ecstasy, overfilled with bliss, and their body went on. As they went towards the hills of Kirapur Sahib, they saw an opening in the hills, and they saw as if a tunnel. And as the saying goes, they saw a light at the end of that tunnel. And as they emerged from that tunnel, they saw this blurry picture that slowly started to unravel. And what they saw in front of them was loads of rivers and loads of trees and these odd objects hanging off the trees. As their vision became a little bit clearer, they saw these huge figures. And as time went on, they recognized these figures to be the figures of Singhs. We're talking 9, 10 foot tall, massive Singhs. And as they're trying to work out what's going on, they take a closer look at the trees. And they see on the trees are these shastar, they're kirpans, they're khande, there are all these things hanging off, as if someone had hung them up there. And as they're trying to make sense of what's going on, one of those Singhs calls them by their name. They say, "Gurbachan Singh, idhar. Gurbachan Singh, come here." And at first they're in shock that this Singh knows my name, and they've realized that they're not on the planet anymore, they're in a different realm of some sort. And Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji asks the Singh, "What's going on here? Who is this? What is this place? Who are you? And who are all these people?" And that figure, that Singh, explains that this is the place known as Shahidi Sarovar. Sarovar meaning bathing pool or river. And the place where the Shaheed Singhs and Singhniya come to rest. And they said, "Look over there. There is Baba Deep Singh Ji Shaheed. There is Baba Banda Singh Bahadur Ji Shaheed. There is Bhai Mani Singh Ji Shaheed. There is Bhai Taru Singh Ji Shaheed." And named all these countless Singhs and Singhniya. And Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji said, "What are you waiting for? What are you doing here?" And the Singh replied very simply but very effectively by saying that we are waiting. When a Singh or Singhni, when a Khalsa becomes Shaheed and gives their life in martyrdom for the Khalsa Panth, they are offered 2 options. The first of which is that if they're happy with their seva in their lifetime, they go to Sachkhand, they go to the realm where Waheguru themselves exists, and they experience that bliss, and their life has become fulfilled. But at the same time, they're always offered a second option, and that is to come back in this world and do more seva. And in this Sarovar of Shaheed, this Shahidi Sarovar, this realm, if you like, this is what these souls are doing. They are waiting for the hukam of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj to go back in the world and take birth and then restore this Raj of Khalsa and bring back those great souls of those Gursikhs. So Shaheedi is a very powerful concept in Sikhi, and do not think that the fruit of one Shaheedi goes to waste. And something I'd like to finish this little snippet off with is a poster you may be able to see there of Baba Gurbachan Singh Ji Manujal, who was also talked about this. And just to give you a quick insight to who Babaji was, they were one of the Panj Singhs in the Jathedars at Sri Akal Takht Sahib in 1986, Sarbat Khalsa. And he was one of the main figureheads, one of the last figureheads of the Karku Lair, who was made Shaheed in 1993. And he says that do not rest, when a Singh or Singhni becomes Shaheed, don't ask for them to rest in peace, but instead do ardas to Guru Sahib so that soul can come back down in the earth, because it's souls of those Shaheeds that will bring this panth into a state of Chardi Kala and also fulfill the bachan of Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, which is Raj Karega Khalsa Aki Rahna Koi. So this state of Shaheedi is very powerful and is also a power that has been tapped into many times in our Itihas, and also is a power that Guru Sahib has on kind of standby for us when the time is right. So just finishing off, I'd just like to show you the books that I've used for today's talk, and also the other things I mentioned. So in particular, first of all, Gyan Kirna, which is the autobiography of Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji Khalsa Pind Rawale, which was written by Gyani Pritam Singh Ji and translated by Jivan Bal Singh Ji. So it can be purchased from Seek to Inspire, and we'll put a link up where you can get that. The second one is Gyani Kirpal Singh Ji, who was the acting Jathedar at the time of Akal Takht, and his eyewitness account to what happened over that time in June 1984. As mentioned yesterday, Sikhs of the Punjab from 1980, from Joyce Pettigrew, and also an amazing book that outlines the lives of many Shaheeds, not just from June 1984, but also November and 1978, is Sikh Martyrs, Volume 1, that can be purchased from NSYF, the National Sikh Youth Federation, who have also got amazing infographics on their website, so do check out their resources. In addition, I'd like to thank Panthik Media, and if you haven't already, please do check out that interview with Bibi Amarjeet Kaur, the wife of Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji, on their Instagram page. We'll post a link to that in a second as well. And if anyone is looking for more resources on this, you can check out our 1984 playlist on Basics of Sikhi, which has many videos that goes into more depth. And also in terms of literature, on our website, we have, under the resources section, we have a 1984 booklet which outlines what happened in that year in a very short and in a summary format. So just taking away and finishing off and rounding off, for the first 2 days, the army shot from outside. We had 11 Singhs and Singhni Shaheed, the first of which was by Menga Singh Ji Babbar, who was shot in the forehead and still remained in Chardi Kala. And we heard about the great seva and the great bhakti that they did in order to achieve the status of Shaheedi. We also looked at the concept of Shaheedi in a bit more detail, and the power that Guru Gobind Singh Ji has bestowed in us as Khalsa in order to either attain victory on the battlefield or attain victory by becoming Shaheed, and then offering us that choice, as many great souls have done, to come back and do more seva of the Panth. And my last beinti and one takeaway from this is that let us ourselves do ardas to Guru Sahib to bring these Chardi Kala Gursikhs back, so that we can elevate the status of the Panth, and we can also learn from these great souls. But it's also important to reflect on our own lives and not just wait for someone else to come and do that job, because there's no reason why we can't be spoke about in the realms of our history in the future. The same thing that was accessible to these Gursikhs in terms of Gurbani, the same Gurbani is around and the same Guru is around, and we have the same resources to access both of those things. So there's no reason why we can't get to that spiritual level ourselves, so that hopefully one day when Guru Sahib blesses us with whatever seva it may be, whether it's fighting on a battlefield, whether it's fighting locally, whether it's fighting your mind, whatever battle that may be, that we can be victorious in that sense as well. So while speaking, I would have made many, many mistakes. I asked Sangat and Guru Sahib for forgiveness, and also for your assistance so we can continue doing these talks. Tomorrow we'll tune in again at 1 p.m. So please do join in. If there's any feedback from the talks, someone's asked about the posters. We'll try and put a link. If I remember, I found them from a store from a Nagar Kirtan, but we'll try and source where you can get these posters from, so that Sangat can also order them as well. And one last punkti that I always like to finish off with is that we've been through many attacks and atrocities, and with Guru Sahib's Kripa, we're still here alive today. And that is because the foundation of Sikhi has been started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, who says, Jinko Sadguru Tapya in Mir na sake koi. That whoever has been established by Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj themselves, no one can ever dare to destroy that path. So forgive us for all the mistakes, and hopefully we'll join in with you tomorrow, Sad Singh Ji. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.